It's funny when somebody moves towards the lectern, the sound goes down. It's always really interesting at the beginning of an event when you can hear that buzz. It is an astonishing number of people that have come today. We have a tradition in the team that I work in that usually about at least a third of the people who sign up to an event won't turn up. And we kind of begin to, though that wearies us, I'm so pleased so many of you have made the amazing effort this morning. Thank you very much indeed. However, the late comers include both of our first two speakers, who are stuck either in traffic or the affairs of state. I think what I would like to do, the affairs of state just arrived. We're going to get an additional few chairs at the back, and we will get going this morning. I'm really very grateful for so many people coming. I wanted to say just one or two things. If there is a fire alarm, please just follow us and the staff out of the building. But one other notice, other than the huge thanks for your coming, is that we are going to live stream this morning. So if anybody has any concerns, could you please let us know? And the us is Rashir from SCVO. And thank you, Rashir, for doing this. One of the reasons for doing this is open government has quite a strong international following, and there are people in Berlin and Washington who are going to be following our conversation today. So that puts it into the kind of context that we see open government anyway. It is a way of Scotland learning and sharing our own learning with other people around the world. So I hope that is okay for people. But if any individual doesn't want to be filmed, please do say so. Sorry, I'm just going to... this is, of course, the launch of our Open Government Action Plan, and we will hopefully have time today to do a really significant amount of work. But this is to mark the hard work from a lot of people in this room. So I'm going to go into our program for the day and welcome onto the stage Mike Russell, who obviously you will all know is a really strong advocate for openness and transparency. He is Cabinet Secretary for Government, Business and Constitutional Relations. Mr. Russell.
Noreen, thank you, and my apologies for being slightly late. It's been that sort of week, I have to say. I was just thinking as I came in here today how to illustrate the idea of open government, and it leapt out at me as I walked into this hall, because some of you may know that I've written fairly extensively about a man called William Spears Bruce, who was the leader of the first and only Scottish Antarctic expedition. And there's a plaque to him down below, just as you come in here, because his institute was founded here, and he put his records here. It took the best part of a century to discover why Spears Bruce did not receive the Polar Medal. He is the only leader of an expedition, a British expedition, and certainly who never got it. Even Shackleton's carpenter got the Polar Medal, but he never got one. And it took a century of inquiry before an English academic called John Dudney managed to unearth the real reason, which was to do with a technical issue in which the king believes that the Polar Medal at that time should only go to people who'd served in the armed forces, and he hadn't. And it is really, for me, an example of how open government is very difficult to do. And if you get it wrong and you go on getting wrong for a long period of time, then huge amounts of concern and angst and anger grow. And in the end, there might be quite a simple explanation for things after all. So I'm very pleased to be here to launch this plan today. I have, as Dorian says, a commitment to open government and a commitment to democratic change. And therefore, when I was asked by the First Minister to take on an extended portfolio last year, I was pleased that both elections, democracy and open government were part of my portfolio. This week I've been, well, this and last week I've been in a wide variety of places. I've been in Ireland, I've been in London, I've been in Brussels, I've been in Zeebrugge. And that is connected with the work I do as Cabinet Secretary for Constitutional Relations, particularly the work I do on Brexit. But just as the example of Spears Bruce is a particularly interesting, if slightly artificial one perhaps for some people, Brexit is a very real example of the need for open government. The value of bringing about change in how procedures and practices in government are done could not be clearer when seen through the prism of Brexit. So I'm delighted today to be publishing this action plan on open government. This is Scotland's second action plan, and it's a product, as Dorian has said, of hard work by many people over a long period of time. And I want to thank Lucy first of all. I'm very grateful to the work that Lucy does. She is the co-chair of the Open Government Steering Group along with myself, which really means she's the chair, because I have to keep saying from time to time, I'm sorry I can't come today, I'm in some other part of the country. But I know how much work she has done, and it is her commitment working with others that has allowed this plan to get to its stage today. And I'm also very pleased that we have COSLA as a partner on this occasion, because I think it is important that we draw as much experience as we can, and we work as closely as we can with the widest range of people. And that partnership with COSLA will grow and develop, I'm sure, over the next few years as we look at issues of open government, because we are pushing in the same direction. We're pushing to improve lives and outcomes of the people we serve. And open government isn't some abstract within that, it is a concrete need if we're going to achieve our objectives. Now, partnership is sometimes a difficult way of working. Sometimes it's a lengthy way of working, but it's the only effective way of working, and I'm committed to that partnership with COSLA. Open government is important to the government of which I'm a member. And sometimes when governments say open government's important, then the reaction to that is always say, yeah, but what about this? And what about that? Why haven't you done that? The reality is it's not easy. Things that are important, things that require to be delivered, are sometimes quite hard to do. And they're quite hard to do not because there isn't a commitment to them, but because the practicalities are hard and the ways of changing methods of working are hard. So when I say the Scottish Government is committed to open government, I mean it. That doesn't mean to say that everything is delivered in the first 10 minutes or that everything will be what everybody wants. It's hard work, but it's work we're engaged on in partnership with many people across Scotland, including many of you in this room today. We are proactively publishing more information than ever before. We are proactively trying to take an open approach to policymaking, and particularly with the Digital Identity Scotland team, developing a common approach to how people demonstrate their identity for accessing public services online. Why do I use that example? Because it's a key example of making sure that the digital age serves the needs of a modern democracy. And openness is at the heart of our refreshed national performance framework. And that national performance framework is in itself a demonstration of commitment to openness, and one that keeps changing and developing and becoming easier to access. But open government is also very important, not even for citizens. It's for the health of our democracy in a global context. The rise of populist politics has created a set of circumstances and the rise of fake news, where it is perfectly possible to say that politics is not in such disarray and such disquiet that we should do things more quickly, more secretively, and that horrible word, more effectively. Open government is a mechanism that we can recognize as a challenge to populism and as a bedrock of real democracy. Scotland joined the Open Government Partnership in 2016 because Scotland shared the values and still shares the values that underpin it: openness, transparency, and accountability. The Scottish Parliament is founded upon those principles. And those of us who will be celebrating the foundation of the Scottish Parliament 20 years ago this year know that those are the founding principles because we remember them being set into the Parliament. And if they're set into the Parliament, they're also set into the government and the responsibility of the government to that Parliament, and most of all, to the people of Scotland. And by having those as our founding principles, we are able to share those with other people, with parliaments that perhaps don't have our advantage of being so clear about why we arose and what we're trying to achieve and what we're still trying to achieve. And we've reached out internationally and worked with experts in a number of fields, including data, financial transparency, participatory budgeting, and citizen engagement, to ensure that our experience is reflected with them and their experience of learning comes back to us. And we were well represented at the recent Open Government Global Summit in Tbilisi. I hope will ensure that Scotland's voice is heard at the upcoming summit in Ottawa later this year. Though I can't commit myself as yet to going because I often don't know what I'm doing tomorrow, let alone in 3 months' time. Now, this action plan that we're celebrating and publishing today is the work of many people. There's been the opportunity for lots of people to be heard, over 200 people taking part in events and consultations. We heard clear priorities. And the publication of this plan not only fulfills the requirement that we have in membership of the International Open Government Partnership, it fulfills the commitment of the Scottish Government, and it builds upon that commitment. And I intend over the next few weeks to talk individually to each of my cabinet colleagues about how they can take forward the ideas within the plan within their own portfolios. Again, it's hard work. And again, not everything will happen at once, but it does mean that there will be a commitment by the Scottish Government and individually by my colleagues in government. Now, the action plan commits to a range of far-reaching initiatives. It includes actions to make it, somebody's calling you, Doreen. I don't recognize the number, unfortunately. As I was saying, it could be for me, of course, but I don't think it is. We're committed to a range of far-reaching initiatives, access to make it easier to get information, empowering people. And because it's been co-created, then it needs to be co-implemented. So these actions have to be things that take part, that happen in communities, as well as happening within government. We can embed open government as an idea. I think we have done in government. We are committed to transparency on every level. But we need to make sure that our partners in the communities are also committed in that way, and not just holding us to account, but helping us to do the job that they have asked us to do. Let me finally turn to the issue of Brexit and openness. I started this essentially this time last year an engagement fund which allowed organisations to bid in, to use resource, to be involved in discussing and looking at Brexit. And there have been a whole range of initiatives. I worked very hard to try and get a young people's group up and running, and it was quite difficult to do because I didn't want something that just meant a few young people came along, asked me a few questions, went away, but we built a core and corpus of knowledge amongst a group of young people about Brexit so that they could be informed participants in discussing how Brexit go ahead. And that, to my mind, has been one of the great joys, and there haven't been many joys in the job, but one of the great joys in the job is working with an informed group of young people who have thought about this, who have debated it and discussed it with their peers, who've had the opportunity to talk to me and to many other politicians, and who are now out talking about the difficulties that Brexit will cause them and the changes they want to see. And there are many other areas in which I've tried to bring some light to shine on what has been a closed process. Much more closed process in the UK than in the EU. From the very beginning, for example, the Barnier Task Force committed itself to publishing minutes, agendas, working papers, and has gone on doing so. It has been very hard to drag information out of the UK government. And exceptional times should produce exceptional responses. The Scottish Government has published extensively on Brexit and has also made sure that we had the widest range of events in which people can talk and discuss. And I personally have tried to be open to as many people as possible. Sometimes my office says too open, to listen to points of view and respond to them. And especially points of view which do not agree with the position the government has, to try and understand if there are things we should change and things we should do differently. There are issues that will always be discussed privately. And I'm not going to hide away from that. And the issue of legal advice is a very difficult one. And just as the UK government was found in contempt of Parliament for not publishing its legal advice, people come to us and say, why don't you publish all your legal advice? But unless you have a private space to consider ideas, then sometimes you can't consider those ideas which are necessary. But that doesn't mean to say there aren't occasions and circumstances where that changes. And there are times where that does happen. So I do think that Brexit illustrates the difficulties, but also may illustrate the potential of involving more and more people. Unfortunately, presently, that has not produced the effect that I wanted to produce, which is to step back from the whole process of Brexit and to say there has been something deeply wrong and flawed in where we are now, and we need to reconsider how we move on from here. But I'm still hopeful that that can happen. And although the clock is ticking, I do think it will be people in the end that will make the difference to what happens in Brexit rather than politicians. Finally, let me say a word or two about where we're going to go from here. I've indicated my commitment with my colleagues. I remain committed within my own portfolio. And I do think that the international movement is something that we will continue to support. We will also draw people in to discuss this with us. And we want to make sure that the partnership we have demonstrated in this room, the partnership we've got with COSLA, the partnership with communities all over continues to grow and strengthen. But it requires a commitment on all sides. And I want to finish with that commitment. Sometimes, in terms of civic participation particularly, and of course the Scottish Parliament was founded on the idea of civic participation, that is simply a shorthand for saying, you don't know what you're doing, but we know what we're doing, so we're going to do it. That's not actually participative anything. What participation is finding a way to share responsibility and to share ideas and commitments, and to make sure each of us, as we fulfill our roles, is doing it with the knowledge of others, with the knowledge of others' views and ideas, and with the consent of others where that is possible. It will not always be possible. Government is sometimes a matter of difficult choices. And sometimes, no matter what choices are made and how explained, people won't agree with them. But that sense of participation and sharing and being partners is what carries you through those difficulties. I think open government at heart is about that. It's about not having them and us. It's certainly not about having, these are the things we do and don't ask us about them except once every 4 years. But it also isn't about everybody saying we're the government. Unfortunately, people have roles. They have to fulfill those roles. If we can find new ways of doing it, new ways of talking to each other, new ways of understanding each other, then we will have a better democracy, a more civilized democracy, and gosh, we really do need that, but also one that's more effective for the outcomes which we are all seeking. And I'm still as naive as I was when I first went into politics a long time ago. I think politics is about improving people's lives. and improving the country in which we live. And open government is a major factor in allowing us to do that in the 21st century. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm happy to participate in questions for the next period. And thank you for being so supportive of this initiative. I hope we can do it together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Russell. And my telephone was just to demonstrate this is really open government. We're now going to demonstrate that absolute partnership with civil society. There is no question that we couldn't be a member of Open Government Partnership, but we also really couldn't operate in Scotland without the strength of the Open Government Network that Lucy chairs. So Lucy.
Morning, everyone. It's fantastic to see so many people gathered here and to celebrate the launch of our new plan. I'd like to start by talking about the partnership bit of the Open Government Partnership. It's a partnership in two very important ways. It's a partnership between government and civil society, and it is a partnership between reformers all over the world working together in solidarity to promote effective democracy. Now, our main focus this morning is on the partnership of government and civil society. I'm delighted to be standing here on behalf of my civil society friends and colleagues, besides my government co-chair on behalf of his colleagues and officials, commending with him our plan for Scotland for the next 2 years. But before I say more about that, I thought I'd spend a few moments talking about the first dimension of OGP partnership. In October last year, I was honoured to be appointed as a civil society member of the International Open Government Steering Committee. And just before Christmas, I attended my first meeting in that role in Washington, DC. The tenor of the meeting was very sombre and very worried to start with. Everyone present was more than aware of the live challenges to democracy happening around the globe and our collective responsibility to stand up for human rights and to protect the rule of law. It was made all the more salutary by the news that one of our own number, the civil society leader in Tanzania, Aden Ayakuzi, couldn't join us because he'd had his passport confiscated by his own government for no apparent reason other than being a civil society leader. Very telling on all of us coming from our different places in the world. Closer to home and on our agenda for that meeting, alongside perhaps more predictable concerns about democracy in such as Azerbaijan or Bosnia, was also the probability that two of the founder members of OGP, of the partnership, the United States and the United Kingdom, would fail to produce an action plan within the agreed timeframe, reflective more broadly of the state of politics in both those places. The United States has now gone into the first stage of the formal procedure review of OGP as a result, and we in the UK are not far behind. And as Mr. Russell has said, we're very concerned about the stagnation of the UK process brought upon us by the stagnation of politics more generally at the Westminster level. You might think all this deeply depressing, and I did to start with. But strangely, by the time I left the 3-day session, I was encouraged and heartened. Why? Well, there are now nearly 100 government civil society partnerships at national and other levels of governance involved with the OGP platform. And despite the tribulations of domestic politics in many places, the global community continues to provide support and solidarity to reformers inside and outside of government to stand firm where necessary and make change where possible, even in the most difficult of circumstances. We were presented to by noted expert Tom Carruthers. He's the Vice President of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And he presented us with an excellent analysis that it is across these many, many loci, all these different places in a wide, worldwide networked effort, that democracy is being sustained. Despite the Trump and the Brexit headlines, the business of improving or weakening democratic practice is no longer the preserve of just one or two powerful states. It's much, much more widespread and networked than that. And as if to prove his point, on the final day of the meeting, in quite a dramatic flourish, we were joined by the brand new Mexican administration representative, appointed literally just the day before, who'd got on the very first flight he could to fly to join us. His at times quite emotional contribution credited the Open Government Partnership global community for giving him and his colleagues strength, even in the face of surveillance and intimidation of his own family by the previous Mexican government. It was a very tangible demonstration that things can and do get better. Now, I don't want to over-dramatize here, but I do want to emphasize that this work, while sometimes seen as a bit technocratic or a bit geeky, is really, really important and part of something much bigger than the individual commitments and actions in the plan that we're launching today might lead you to believe. The world is getting smaller, and the things we do here in Scotland do influence behaviour, not just at home. We only had 1 year for our first National Action Plan, but aspects of that have already rippled around the globe. We're seen as a pioneer in participatory budgeting, and I have high hopes that our coming work to embed this further and on budget transparency more generally will become world leading. I'm repeatedly asked to speak when I'm out and about in the OGP community about the co-designed approach we've taken here in Scotland to linking government performance to the Sustainable Development Global Goals. It happens at practically every OGP event I attend, and I expect to be asked again to do so, hopefully along with some of you, at the next Global Summit in Ottawa in May. A big theme of OGP across the board, and Mike touched on it, is harnessing digital technology to do governance differently. And I'm pleased that we've sought in our plan to do more on key inclusive aspects of this, such as digital participation, data literacy, and CivTech, and know that we have the opportunity to connect with and learn from brilliant CivTech work being done elsewhere. I'd like to point, for example, to the cities of Madrid and Buenos Aires, or to Kaduna, which is a region of Nigeria, roughly equivalent in population to Scotland, all three of whom are part of the same OGP Pioneer programme as Scotland is. And they're all colleagues from those three places are willing to work with us and to share. There's a lovely short video about the Madrid work. It's called When People Have Power, which is, and the work that they've done has now spread to multiple cities worldwide through the network. It's on the OGP website, and I'd recommend you have a look at it when you've got time. And I know our colleagues in COSLA are taking an active interest in it as well. Speaking of COSLA, and returning to the government civil society aspect of partnership at the heart of OGP, as I said I would, the one slight sliver of silver lining to the delay in the work of OGP at the UK level, the National Action Plan, is that it has provided us with the time to do more thinking and work about how we as the Scotland Partnership can offer to lead a new commitment within and around developing better multi-level governance practice across the UK, working with local authorities and local community organisations, our OGP colleagues and friends in Wales and Northern Ireland, and our colleagues working actively at the UK level. It's an interesting piece of work, as you might imagine, full of practical, institutional and political challenges, but one where we think that civil society partners, with our freedom to engage across the piece, not bound by the institutions or the politics, can really help. Like every aspect of OGP, at global level, the committee is made up of government representatives and civil society representatives as peers. This automatically creates a very different culture and approach than you'll find at other international gatherings. There's a strong sense of working together on the same team, regardless of your background or of your day job. This is a culture that I think too has started to take hold here in Scotland. OGP is just one way to drive change, but I hope we're contributing to providing a framework and some key exemplars for modern governance practice and spaces such as today to discuss and promote them. Changing the behaviour and practices of many generations is hard, but we are beginning to experience real-time the benefits of genuine co-working and co-design of policy and not just give lip service to it. There are sticking points, of course. Traditional party politics has an instinct for secrecy, not transparency, And it can take a level of courage to see the benefits of being open beyond the short term. I can't and I won't hide my dismay at the self-defeating secrecy and misinformation at the core of Brexit project. And I commend our Scottish Partnership's efforts to bring what we can into the light. But that effort needs to push through all aspects of government here too. And we have to do more to gain acceptance of the principle of publish by default and ensure that we do get appropriate and timely responses to freedom of information requests. But it's not just politics that can get in the way. In the last year, we in the civil society team have experienced, believe you me, wide-eyed disbelief from our civil service colleagues that we really do want to see and share certain data. And the actual delight when the penny drops that we really, really do want to know about the detail behind the scenes. Government colleagues here really shouldn't underestimate people's willingness and ability to engage when the process is understood to be both meaningful and influential. In finishing, my sincere thanks go both to my civil society colleagues and to my government colleagues on the steering committee, and in particular mention, of course, Doreen Grove, the powerhouse behind it all, for getting us so far. I'd like to thank you for all being here this morning and being part of this conversation and agenda, and simply to say, now it's up to us all to make it live and breathe.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Our next speaker is Councillor Graham Houston from Stirling Council, but also Vice President Cosler. I want to stress how unusual it is that Scotland is taking this approach. We are genuinely looking to see if we can get open government practices right through our system in Scotland. If we're going to reform public services, that needs to be right across the board. So we have members of scrutiny bodies here with us today, and we have someone from Parliament here today. So there is a real energy in Scotland about looking differently at open government. We are genuinely trying to think about how we can make the lives of people different. So, Councillor Houston, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Good morning, colleagues. I'm delighted to be here with you this morning at this launch of really the second Open Government Action Plan, and I'm looking forward to the discussions that we'll have later on as well. Because it's important that we do talk about how we do this together. And this is about, I suppose, moving from aspirations into action. How do we do it? I don't think there'll be any disagreement about what we should do. And the big challenge as far as how we actually move into a place. And are conditions ideal for it? Well, I suppose we could say that yes, conditions have never been better, in that the terms of the world is changing, and not necessarily changing for the better. But the challenges that are facing us politically across the globe are huge. And yet perhaps it's that burning platform that says we need to engage. On the other hand, of course, when you're trying to engage at a time of challenge, then there's naturally suspicion about the audience you're trying to engage with, but you're only talking to us now because you need us. When times have been easier, you've never come and talked to us. But no matter, we need to put that aside and recognise that this is something that we need to engage in. This is a process that we need to go through. We need to be open, and we need to face up to the risks. I guess as some politicians will understand it, is that you can be very, very open and put all the information out there, and at times that's used against you, whether it's by other politicians in opposition, or whether it's by the media. But we need to get beyond that, about if this is the right thing to do, and that information needs to be out there and shared in civil society, so they understand what are the size of the challenges, they understand the direction of travel that's been taken, and they understand the root cause of some of the decisions that have been taken. That's what's important. That's that ultimate goal. So we shouldn't hang back from that and hide away from saying, well, you know, there's only some information that we can put out. Of course, as Mr. Russell was saying, it's important that you have that space to consider the unthinkable, and you do look at all the options before you settle in the direction of travel. but beyond that, I think it is important. So as the COSLA Vice President, I'm delighted to reaffirm our commitment to work with our government and with civil society so we can actually deliver this plan. Local government itself delivers, we're talking about the framework, but 60% of that framework is delivered through local authorities. So it's important that we are engaged in that. And our councils, I think, form an essential link to our communities, including, and most importantly, those in our communities that are most vulnerable. And councils, I know, are determined to build on the work already underway through the local governance review and our long-standing commitment to community engagement. And although we've been committed to it, I don't think that we've been as active in doing it as we could be, or indeed as we should be. In particular, we have a proactive drive to what are calling our mainstream participatory budgeting. And we've got some good examples in that. In Dundee City, for instance, excellent examples of real engagement and real examples of where the community has taken on board and overcome the fears of extending voting to 16-year-olds, etc. And you can see 16-year-olds voting in favour of projects that actually affect the other end of the age scale and saying this is the right thing to do. So there's some good examples of doing that. So this is all about how we do our local government and not just about an end in itself. If we are to tackle, I think, the inequalities that too many in our communities face, and if we're going to create life opportunities for all, we need to embed those values of openness and honesty and transparency and accessibility in all that we do. And again, that's important that we move from that aspiration into action, I think. I think the alternative to that is the voter alienation. And we've seen the level of participation in voting in local government. So that is a concern. It should be a concern to us all about why it's so low. Because the potential of populism is with the companions, of course, of division, the polarization, discrimination, and victimization. So I think it's up to all of us, I think, to need to create a culture of trust and confidence in our organizations by working with our communities and with individuals within our communities. This is, we believe, the best way to develop and deliver services in a way that are responsible to need and not based on any kind of preconceptions. I think for Scottish local government to be effective and for our communities to be a more equal place, we need to be able to make local decisions about what will work locally. So we need to, and that means letting go and allowing communities to decide what's best for them and not dictating to them that from we know. And I think that starts from government to local authorities, and we have a discussion about ring fence funding, etc., on a regular basis with Mr. Russell's colleagues. And we, at the same time, local authorities need to let go of some of the things that we do to our communities and work more with our communities to allow them to do what they need to do themselves. So we're committed to strengthening local democracy, are clear that open government is our opportunity to make the case for positive change and to continue to strive for betterment in our communities. I'm certain that as a sphere of government closest to our communities, we have a particular role in ensuring the principles of subsidiarity, of transparency, participation and interdependence are all realised. And tackling inequality and poverty, eradicating homelessness, improving mental health and well-being continue to be difficult and significant challenges. So we will need to work together to build a real and deeper relationship, because it is about relationships at the end of the day. Rather than being about short-term transactions, it's about how we work together and how we strengthen that relationship. There is a need for a change in the culture of how we work, which includes that approaches to co-design participation by experience. And that needs to underpin all of that. I think the need for parity of esteem between all of those involved in representative and participatory democracy. So I'd just like to finish by being clear that while councils will always make the case to continue and develop services locally, that in line with all the public sector, we have very limited resources to do that. So I think taking that open government approach not only help develop local priorities and increase awareness of the difficult choices that we all face, but I think honesty and trust with our communities can stop our citizens being in a permanent state of bewilderment as taxes rise and local services get cut and perhaps simply end altogether. So I look forward to the discussions this morning and look forward to working with all of you and our partners in the delivery of this action plan. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Now it's your turn. All of our speakers have agreed to a question and answer session. So we have a roving microphone somewhere. And we'll take 2 or 3 questions at a time. Who would like to be first? Oh, silence. You silence them all. Yeah, Alex.
Is that okay? Alex Sola, I was one of the people fortunate enough to work with the civil society steering group, and that has been a very, very enjoyable and rewarding experience so far. And I was going to ask the panel about how you might help us to get started. Where would you wish to take the actions that the Councillor kindly suggested? What aspirations in this document would you like to start with?
Lizzie, would you like to start with that one?
Thanks, Alex. I've got 2 starting points, really. One is the one that I'm very pleased to hear Mike talk about this morning, which is his commitment to us today to go and talk to his cabinet colleagues about this. Because I think there is something about openness and open style of government, very much in keeping with, as you said, the Scottish Parliament founding principles, very in keeping with the thing that we've come to talk about as the Scottish approach. It's something that we ought to all be very proud of and create an environment where all of us, civil society and government at Scottish and at local level, feel that we have permission and authority to move forward with. So I think creating that kind of environment and talking about this stuff is one very good starting point. That's a general point. More specifically, and Alex knows this because he's heard me bang on about it, the thing that I have a real big moment about is financial transparency. It's a big commitment to the top of our action plan this year. We did some preliminary work about it last year. But I think if you get the money information open and understood and meaningful to a wider group of people beyond the political budget, it's the turnkey that changes everything. And you can have much more meaningful conversations about all sorts of policy areas. If people are sharing genuinely in the inevitable trade-offs with an unlimited budget, whatever it is, and to understand what you can and can't do. So I think that making real progress on that, hopefully moving towards having a budget portal, an online entity that will explain the Scottish budget in the same way as we've seen happen in Georgia and Estonia and Mexico, that would be a brilliant starting point.
Thank you. Mr. Russell, would you like to pick up?
Yeah, I mean, I think this document is very clear, not just about what should be done, but how it should be done. I mean, it's very useful. It's laid out both in terms of the issues, what needs to be done about those issues, and how they might be resolved. Now, if I look at it, I suppose part 5, the Brexit part is my part, more than anybody else's in government. And I think we are already well down that road. So it's not a question of starting it, it's a question of continuing to be on that path and continuing to honor the commitments there. But then, as Lucy indicates, on financial transparency, there are issues still to be addressed. There's input and output in financial transparency, and that's really the difficulty. The issue on what is spent is complex and probably needs a lot more accurate presentation and a lot more thinking about how people respond to it. The question on how you respond to that in political terms is, on one sense, much easier. And that's the thing I would encourage people to have that active debate about what money is and how it's spent. But then it becomes a question of political choices about how you spend. And that becomes very contentious indeed. And that's where the issue of transparency sometimes becomes problematic. You're talking about choices which other people, Graham was indicating, you will be eviscerated for some of those choices if you choose to talk about it. And that's a real issue too. So there perhaps is a, dare I say it, missing violence today, which is transparency is also about those who report on what happens, so that they can in actual fact see that an open debate is not a split, a discussion of political issues and priorities between citizens and of various types and various levels of government. It's not a punch-up, but actually an attempt to try and find a way forward. So I think if I had a wish list of some sort, it would be the ability for everybody involved to create a space in which there can be genuine discussion and genuine exchange of information. And that would make the biggest difference in what we're all doing.
I think that's really helpful because one of the, as you said, it's almost unsaid in here. That transparency gives people the information to then understand. But you're right, the media is an area where we probably need to help find a route through this not becoming adversarial. That openness becomes the way we do business. Councillor Gibson, do you want to?
Could I just comment on this language? I think adversarial is accepted. We are adversaries and contend. Confrontational is the issue, and it's the confrontational nature of the society in which we live that actually makes things very hard for politicians when they start talking about open government. Now, I think there's a way through that. I think there's a responsible way through that, but it shouldn't be underestimated. And to ask people to have more and more pressure piled on them willingly, you have to show them there's a trade-off, and it's finding that trade-off.
Thank you. I think from a local government point of view, the financial transparency is absolutely vital. When I go along to participate in budgeting and priority-based budgeting and say to the community, we have one pot of money. Would you like us to preference the young over the old? And they look at me and say, oh, well, that's too difficult. As politicians and leaders of councils, that's exactly what we have to do. We have one pot of money, and we've got two groups of people, for that example. Where do we put it? So the transparency on the decisions that we make and the rationale behind it and the pressures that we're under, I think it's vital that we get that out there. So that it's understanding. It's not providing excuses. It's an understanding of how the priorities are set, what the demands are, and how then we're allocating limited resources that we all have in any part of the public sector, how we make those kind of decisions. So I think that bit's important. I think that the part around participatory budgeting is also important because it is empowering some of the community. So it's taking some of the 1% of local government money, giving it to local communities and saying, you decide. We're not going to do things to you. There's a resource that you require. You determine where you think your priorities are. And I think that sort of two ends of that kind of discussion, getting local participation, local involvement, and providing greater transparency at the top end about decisions that are being made, which will then allow us, I think, to get into a better conversation about when we're then setting the budget. Because I don't think we can just go to, as we're trying to do, I think quite unsuccessfully, participate in budgeting and saying, here are the problems, what do you think? We've got to give the background and create the understanding first of all.
Thank you. Another question? Yep.
Hi there, I'm Ethan Young from Inclusion Scotland. Disabled people face a lot of barriers to participating in general, particularly in civic participation. A lot of these barriers are additional impairment-related costs, which they face that non-disabled people wouldn't to allow them to participate. So my question is, what's being done to ensure that disabled people can participate fully in this process on an equal playing field?
Thank you very much. Who would like to start?
I think the issue you raise is one that needs constant thought about. It's not a question of one-offs. It's saying, we've got that and sorted, we'll move on. I was very impressed when Jean Freeman was
setting up the new social security arrangement, which she did, and she did ensure that there was a constant dialogue and debate with a variety of groups and individuals, so that that thinking was included within what she was doing. She helped me then to hold a couple of events on Brexit, which were very helpful. But I don't think we've done enough to continue that flow of dialogue. So I think we've got to make sure that it isn't the question of saying, we've done that, we did that last week, but we've got somebody else to do this week. There are systems established that allow that dialogue and that participation to continue. So that is something we need to note as a norm of activity. But some good things happened, some other things still to do.
I'd take a slightly different take on that question, which is to point out, as I did it earlier, the intrinsic nature of the Open Government Platform itself. By its very nature, it is about involving groups and communities and organisations as part of civil society in a peer equal relationship and conversation with government. And that means groups and communities of all kinds in a very, very inclusive way. And that's the way that civil society operates. So if it's not part of our DNA in what we're doing in the OGP process itself, there's something severely wrong. And if there's anything that anybody here in this room or beyond can point to where we're not being sufficiently inclusive, then you'll get a very, very open reception and we'll do something about it.
I would just want to echo that, because it's not just about participation in this process, it's about participation generally. So whatever the barriers are, we should be identifying them and finding ways to remove the barriers. That's just, I think, part of, as Lucy said, part of the DNA in what we're doing. So yes, we can use technology and all the things that we should be doing anyway, but reducing the barriers where they exist which stands against open access, if they're there, we need to be working away at removing.
I'm just going to add a very practical addition to that, and thank you all. The second commitment in the plan is specifically about looking at a framework of participation, and one of the work streams within that is absolutely to look at how we ensure that inclusivity is tied into the DNA of everything that we do. So anyone who wants to be involved in that discussion is very welcome. And as we go into the workshop after the break, then we will try and get down to some of that technocratic thinking. So we've probably got time for one more question.
Thank you. Matthew Rice, Scotland, Open Rights Group. I just had a brief question about the situation. If there are some professional bodies, such as COSLA, actually, that are not directly subject to freedom of information laws, whether they interpret their responsibilities under open government slightly differently, because they're seen as a more important role to be proactive in publishing information when there's a situation in which an individual can't ask such a question under the Freedom of Information Scotland Act to COSLA and get an answer. But that's not just yourself, Councillor, but across the panel, but kind of interpreting these different bodies that have a very important role to play.
Thank you very much.
I'd be interested, what are the kind of questions that we wouldn't want to answer anyway? I always think about freedom of information. Why do we need it? What's not been said? COSLA it's a membership representative organisation of local authorities across Scotland, across the political spectrum of Scotland, which tries to provide platforms for both policy and thinking, to take issues forward on behalf of local authorities, and it is, as I say, strongly a representative body that engages at a whole variety of levels with government, with the civil servant, with the public generally. So although it's not, it's its constitution that's set up in that way, I would be very concerned if there were requests that have been made that had to be made under freedom of information because it's not readily available. Because I think we look upon ourselves as being an open organisation, open to its members, and responsive in that way.
Right. Graham, I'm a bit of an idealist on this subject. I really don't want us to have freedom of information laws. Information should be out there by default anyway, and that is the way the world is going. You know, technology, social media, our lives are becoming more and more transparent. We shouldn't be looking to create secrecy where there's no need for any. In terms of the freedom of information laws itself, it's not been without controversy in civil society and the voluntary sector as well, whether the law should be extended to apply also to charities and so on. My view is that as long as it's appropriate law, and it's not just a one-size-fits-all that usually applies to the public sector, then absolutely, why not? But really, it shouldn't be necessary. Civil society organisations should be at the forefront of being transparent and open and accountable for what they do and setting the example for the private sector and the public sector.
I heard a teacher some weeks ago define the issue of trust within the international sphere. And he talked about it in terms of the EU, and he said, when you trust people, then that trusting relationship works better if there is an underpinning legal basis. You may never have to use the legal basis, but it works better if there's that underpinning legal basis. He uses the example of the difference between actually the UK approach and the European approach. The European approach is based upon trust, one country to another, but it is enforceable. You know, the UK believes that trust is some sort of absolute, but you never enforce it. And in a sense, that is how I feel about FOI. FOI is essentially about trust, and this is absolutely right. I think our mindset has to be that, with the exception, you know, there are confidential relationships in life. You know, your lawyer, your confessor, perhaps. There are confidential relationships, but by and large, the space in which you operate is a public space. Then the information is within the public domain, and that should be the mindset of organisations. Now, it's not always easy. You know, organisations find it difficult. The system is abused sometimes on both sides, but you know, sometimes can be really badly abused by people who are using it as a political battering ram rather than seeking information. But that being the case, I don't think any organisation working within the public sphere, particularly, not entirely, I think there's an argument for it in the commercial sphere too, but any organisation working in the public sphere, its mindset should be the ordinary nature of data being and information being freely available and on the basis of trust with those who interact with that organisation. That's certainly how I see it operating.
Thank you very much. That's a very, very good place for us to end the panel discussion. Trust is absolutely what open government is about. And we will have an opportunity after the break to come back and discuss how we move forward this agenda. First of all, could you possibly thank the panel in the usual way? A little break now. While you're catching your breath and having a coffee, we're going to allocate the tables to all of the commitments, and we'll have a sign which says where they all are. So find your way back to a table where you have an interest in the theme that we're talking about. Of course, our 5 themes, you probably already have the plan under your pillow. On your table, there are copies both of the actual commitments, but also the published copy of the plan today is very specifically in plain English. We did that because we do want to build trust with people. We want it to be able to be read and understood by people who are not imbued in the world that we are of the jargon of transparency and openness and participation. All words that we were challenged on, I may say, by Plain English Society, who said, explain yourself, what does that mean? So a really good discipline for us. So as you, there are a post-it note on your table. Think about what we have 2 years to do this plan. What would good look like at the end of 2 years? What would you really like to see? So thank you all very much. Have a quick break and we will come back to that workshop.